My name is Rob Carmichael. I'm a resident of Los Angeles, California, and a graphic designer. My practice, it's mostly just me occasionally with an assistant, but currently no assistant. And I mostly focus on, or I sort of inadvertently focus on music packaging work, although I do other things, but I'd say about 80 to 85% of my work is music packaging. For like mostly underground labels or a little bit smaller size concerns, although occasionally I have some forays into fancier pants things. Yeah, so it's sort of, the studio started kind of as a side project. I was just working temp jobs, and I'd had a record label for many years, and as some of the bands that I'd worked with went on to bigger things, they asked me to help out. So it started to be just something I would do on the side when, after my terrible temp job ended, I would go home and work a little bit on some record covers for this band or that band, and eventually it just sort of snowballed into a full-time operation. But 2005 is when I officially kind of gave it a go full-time and made it its own thing, quitting the day job. The idea of just taking one's future into one's own hands is just great. I feel proud and really lucky, and a little surprised that no one's called me on it and has told me that I'm actually not very good, or it's just that strange feeling of like it's just me making the rules. It's great. I really am grateful for that possibility. It's a funny question because I didn't really realize you could be a graphic designer until pretty late in the game. So the moment when I realized that you could make visual packaging for music was there was a record label called Shrimper Records, which was this very small cassette-only operation in the 90s, and they would dub cassettes and just photocopy the covers and fold them up. And I bought a bunch of Shrimper cassettes, and that was cool, and I was really into it. But then one cassette I bought, they had used an old, like a pre-made cassette and just dubbed over it. And on the back of the cassette was a little Warner Brothers logo that was in the plastic. It was molded into the plastic, and the guy who made the cover just crossed out that Warner Brothers logo, and I remember thinking, somebody did that. Like, that was like a moment where I realized that somebody was there intentionally doing something in this one moment of, so definitely that's when I first kind of had the idea that you could be a graphic designer, but there's like a whole, if I look back, there's a lot of things I was fascinated about, a lot of old records. There's like a ABBA, the record, ABBA the album is like a foundational record for me, a record cover. There's some old Camper Van Beethoven records. There's a lot of things that I think over the years I just kept on coming back to, but I didn't really think about them as something you could do for a living until that sort of weird cassette realization, and then I started putting the pieces together and realizing that I could at least participate in it. I don't think I thought at that point I could make a career out of it, but it was something that I could do at that point. Favorite Shrimper release? Probably Lonesome Surprise by Refrigerator. There's so much music. Everybody has a band, and it's everyone thinks that they're the only ones doing this, but they're not. There's just hundreds of thousands of records that come out. So really, it's got to catch the viewer's attention in some way. I like to think it's got to make them think, what is that? Like, because it's just an inundation. You can't make one thing out from the other, so you need something that will shock the person at least slightly, or give them some sense of wonder or something that's just, you have to grab them somehow, because there's just too much stuff out there that you got to break through somehow. I mean, LA's got a pretty good thing going. I'm not quite as, I don't quite have my ear to the ground in the same way that I might have when I was, in my 20s, but I think LA's has some interesting possibilities, but it feels very, like, it's so much easier for things to be decentralized now with the internet, and so you don't have that, I mean, you do and you don't. I don't know. I'm not sure if I have the best prediction on that, but LA definitely has some really interesting things going on musically these days. That's a tough question. My work. I think I work in a few different ways. I very much want to. I take it very seriously that this is commercial art and that it's work with a brief. So I try to make my style and work as flexible as possible to, I try not to be very top down, like this is how it looks, it's my way or the highway. I try to find solutions that will work for, lots of different situations. But I think I have a real interest in layering, and I have a real interest in strong typography. I think some of that has to do with not working for very large acts. When you work with a band that's very popular, there's so many layers of management and record label, and they all very much want to sell that person because there's so much money riding on it. So I do have the freedom for the most part that I don't have to do that quite as much. I think the thing that bores me the most with a record package, if it's just like a photo, even a nice photo with just some type out of the way, it's been done, it's very boring. I mean, there's obviously times where I've done that, and sometimes that's the only solution, but it's just such an easy thing to do, and I'm sometimes asked to do that. I sometimes don't really take credit for those things. Sometimes I do, but it's that feels like an easy way out to me. There are times where I get to work with photography that is more interesting, but I think photography is really tough. It's really tough to have a super compelling photo. The trouble is that it's just easy and cheap now to have photos made, but it's not that easy to get good photos made, So that's why I tend to avoid that. I'm also interested in sort of, I think I'm interested in manipulated reality in these, on a lot of these sort of music packages. So if I am working with photos, I'm messing with it, dropping stuff in, or half-toning it and breaking it up, or just trying to do something so that there's a little bit more texture and mood than just a straight digital photo. I mean, I know what I'm doing more. Some of the first things I did, I look back and I wasn't trained as a designer, so one of the first records I'm sort of proud of and sort of sheepish about my participation in is a record by Destroyer called Street Hawk, A Seduction, which very clearly references an earlier record, and that's fine. I don't mind the reference, but what I wish I could undo is the type on that, and I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't really understand type. I hadn't played around with it very much, and so I think that's maybe one of the biggest things that I've grown to understand is how essential type is. I mean, type is what makes a record look insanely professional, or like a cheapo local release that like somebody's friend put together, So let's see here. The nicest, well, I mean, I'm very good friends with Animal Collective because I've worked with them for years, so I would say that they're really quite nice. But people who I'm not sort of very close friends with, I think Adam from the War on Drugs was really nice, and Trey Anastasio from Fish, who I just did his solo record. Though I did not deal with him directly, I got nothing but super positive feedback through his people. It was just like, do what you want to do, it's great, I love it. I'm showing all my friends, you know, so I would say those two folks were definitely super encouraging, at least in recent years. Let's see here. I mean, I guess it's hard to say that this particular band was the worst, in that I think that the main person in the band is maybe bipolar or has some issues, but yeah, I was working on a sort of a large retrospective, like complete works box set for this band, and was halfway through the record, or more than halfway through the design, and he'd been kind of weird, and then was just fired kind of out of the blue, with no just saying that it didn't seem like I was committed to the project, which was strange because I was doing a lot of work, and all my work is actually in the final, you know, the final product that I'm not credited on or whatever. So I'm not going to say who that is, but yeah, that's sort of, you know, musicians. There's a lot of anxiety. Just on the bass line, if you're a musician doing a record, you want this thing to be perfect. You've worked very hard, both writing the songs and recording it. So there's always a lot of emotions and insecurities going on. But yeah, this one particular thing, just being fired, well, really think I was being communicative and working pretty hard on, was certainly very strange. And I was pretty bummed about that for a while, but what are you going to do? Rules or constraints? I like that. I mean, every project I try and set some rules on, because I'm not a grid guy, only because I tend to work faster than I started before I set up a grid. But I do like some structure like that. I think I tend to always come back to like just really centered type for whatever reason. I don't know if that's a constraint or not, but I always like to see how I can just I like to think of everything in layers, and I like to think of the layers as not caring about each other so much, but inexplicably they work together because I'm really actually sweating them working together. But so I like the idea. I often do like just like a centered type and an image underneath it, and then just sort of play around with it until it starts to work. So that's just, I don't know if that's a constraint or so much as like a crutch, but like that's what I do, and I think I like the results. So people seem to like it. Okay, so. I mean, it kind of depends on the particular of the job. So like I said before, you know, I try to be as flexible as possible with my style, but given my own, if I get to choose what style I'm working on, yeah, I feel like I have probably like 5 or 6 different sort of normal entryway, you know, like I set up a lot of layers, I set up a lot of transparency and have things interact, and then I just kind of move things around, honestly, until they start to gel in a way that seems, you know, interesting, I would say. So yeah, I'm not the sort of person who's like, I'm going to like, you know, draw a candle and then have a bird behind it. Like I just kind of like pull things and throw them down and kind of shift them around on the page until they start to make sense to me, more or less. I mean, yeah, that depends on the month, but let's see here. Currently, in different stages, I think I have 8 things I'm working on. that's sort of essential to just like surviving, you know, because if you wrap something up and you don't have something else coming along, then you aren't getting paid that month. So so yeah, there is a lot of like keeping keeping different projects in your mind and trying to quarantine them a little bit so that you don't go too crazy. But yeah, there's always multiple things. When there aren't multiple things, it's a little scary because you're worried about what's going to come next, you know. I'm sure you've heard a lot about tacos. The Avenue 26 taco truck is just sublime. That's it's funny that I go to food first, so that's something I like. I love the beach. You know, I've taken my kids down to Hermosa a lot, and that's just one of the most wonderful things. In terms of culture, I'm a huge fan of the Marciano Foundation, which is run by the Marciano Guess Jeans family. I've done a little work for them, but even before I did work for them, I just really like that space. It's in this old Masonic temple, and it's just super weird and cool. You know, at this point in my life, I'm not the most social guy anymore. So, you know, I mostly spend a lot of time with my kids on the weekends. So, you know, I can tell you some great kid-friendly parks and the best place to get ice cream. But, you know, that's the big reason my wife and I moved out here was, yeah, more space, and it's definitely more kid-friendly. Just having a backyard for the kids to run around in. We've been living in New York, and I love New York a lot, but LA is a better place for me, and especially this time in my life. I'm not big on Hollywood and like the sort of attendant star thing. I really don't care about famousness, and there's a lot of that. On this side of town, this far east, it's a lot less prevalent, but the further west you go, the more Hollywood-y things feel, and I definitely don't like that. You know, this sort of size and traffic stuff can be kind of a bummer sometimes. You know, if you have a client meeting in Venice and you're here, it's, you know, your day is shot basically getting out there for the meeting and coming back. And then the summers. I don't like the summers. I like the fall, winter, and spring, but summers are just too hot. I'm not a hot weather person, but so those are probably my biggest drawbacks to Los Angeles.